My name is Michael Brown, and I serve as our Associate Director for the United States Department of Homeland Security's Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, also known in short as CP3. Sometimes we're asked at CP3, if someone is very close to committing an act of violence, has planned or even committed a violent act, what can we do to prevent them from committing another act of violence? Well, that's why we're here today, to discuss initiatives that are designed to help rehabilitate and prevent recidivism. Because of the importance of this type of work, CP3's Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program awarded a grant to the Counter Extremism Project to create the 4RNetwork. And that's why we're here today, to launch, to increase the awareness of, and to increase membership of a first of its kind radicalization, rehabilitation, reintegration, and recidivism, or 4R network.
We work on a wide range of terrorist and extremist phenomena, so from extreme violent right-wing to all the way to Islamist terrorism, and work on several fields, including, of course, the analysis, advice, and policy recommendations around the prosecution, reintegration, and rehabilitation of released terrorist offenders. And so if I just touch very quickly on two issues in my presentation, and then my colleagues from CP and our external experts will really talk into more detail on the various aspects that I will be talking about. So first of all, the challenges in reintegrating released terrorist offenders and what we had seen during our work in the last couple of years, where some of the challenges lie. And I'll compare Europe to the United States. And then, of course, as Michael already said, the reintegration of returning extremist fighters, an issue which is not quite yet at the forefront of the discussion, but I think merits much more intensive discussion than it has until now. So what did we find? We started the whole project on looking how this works already in 2019 in the US, but then very intensively did a actual university-based research study on how this is done in Germany. How are terrorist offenders who are about to be released reintegrated into society? What are the challenges? How does it work? Now, my second point is not only because we've done work on this issue of violent extremist fighters joining conflicts, in particular joining the war in Ukraine for a couple of years, but also because here you see a real legal gap. And so far, we've been lucky with the Ukraine conflict that we saw violent right-wing and violent left-wing individuals from Europe, from the United States. They traveled, but they already, most of them returned shortly afterwards. But from Europe, still some are there, but they are nowhere near the numbers that we had with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria.
I want to add a different layer of complexity to this, incorporating some perspectives from behavioral science and behavioral health, which are two very different fields, both of which have been playing an increasingly important role in discussions on violence prevention writ large, and specifically on the prevention of violent extremism and the reintegration and rehabilitation of folks affiliated with extremist violence. One of the challenges of looking at a sort of trans-contextual approach to the integration of behavioral health, mental health perspectives, or behavioral science writ large into these issues is that while we have working operational definitions of violent extremism, which we can all understand and agree on the USA definition of advocating, engaging in, preparing, and supporting ideologically motivated or justified violence, the challenge is that it becomes more complex than that when working across different legal contexts, as Dr. Schindler mentioned. It is very difficult for behavioral scientists to study violent extremism as a unified behavior, as one single behavior, because there's a strong distinction between legal kinds of behavior and natural kinds of behavior. Depending on the legal context or the national context or even local context that you're operating in, what can be prosecutable as an offense obviously differs. An additional complicating factor is that violent extremism is a journey that involves many different behavioral stages and phases, and each of those have certain sub-elements, all of which represent possible intervention points, but that also require unique approaches for each of these. So we have to understand this principle of multifinality, that one factor or set of experiences can lead to different outcomes depending on how they interact with other factors in the context. And in the same way, there's many possible pathways, not simply these childhood experiences or experiences of adulthood stress and trauma that can contribute to this. So to take a behavioral approach means to appreciate that when we're looking at something like recidivism, we have to take more of an approach focusing on individual person-centered behavioral health, because those same experiences that could have contributed to those initial behaviors that led to a person's decision to join an extremist movement and participate in violence could subsequently lead not only to recidivism, but could contribute to a host of other antisocial factors that could continue that person's negative contributions or could exacerbate negative effects on society and could also continue to create challenges for the legal and justice systems.
We see that there's three different kind of levels or ways where CSOs can be involved in exit and rehabilitation work. First of all, we see the type of CSOs which are usually multifunctional. They have a multi-competent role and coordinating really most of the work that engages the clients. And then we have other NGOs that might have specialized type of expertise in a given field and offers one or a few services to clients disengaging, leaving violent extremism, but for that matter, don't offer a full program, sort of saying. And the third type of role could really be when there's a relevant methodology that suits this target group, but the overall objective of the organization is not dedicated only to violent extremism. And when we look at CSO's involvement, we can discuss the added value of why should CSOs be involved here? What's the gain? Civil society organizations usually can start from a very particular focus and develop their work from there. We also see the importance of CSOs as uniquely positioned to build trust. CSOs are usually seen as independent, distinct from the state actors.
I will bring in some lessons learned regarding returned women and minors. They are different groups, but there are, of course, important overlaps when we consider these individuals when it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration. So the first lesson learned that I will share actually is that we speak about rehabilitation, integration, but of course, no rehabilitation without repatriation. Those remaining in the camps, those European nationals, minors and women need to be repatriated or need to be returned to their home countries before we can even start about rehabilitation and integration. So another lesson learned that I would like to share is really that we have to prosecute female returnees as well, depending on the evidence. If there is enough evidence for prosecution, both for terrorism offenses, but also for core international crimes and other type of offenses, that's very much needed to enable or to support also, in some sense, rehabilitation and reintegration. So lesson 3 here is that really keep in mind different profiles and roles when it comes to female returnees. Do not but also not overestimate them. Lesson 4, to have gender-sensitive approaches to risk and needs assessment, but also in general to rehabilitation and reintegration, as well as disengagement work. There's a lot of development. It's just that something that we still need to consider how we can, across the board, always consider what it means to have more gender-sensitive approaches. And this is lesson number 5. Yes, there are specific needs and challenges regarding returned minors, but child protection really needs to be a priority, and security agencies should be involved, but not necessarily all the time, especially when it comes to very young children. That can be, in many cases, very much counterproductive, and stability and in a routine, stable contact persons and so on are much more important to create that kind of stability that then leads to their supporting their reintegration. So lesson 6 here is really to be proactive, so not wait until the return, but really see each case before a potential return so that all relevant actors can be involved. And of course, it's really individualized case management that is key. From the returnee coordination, what is really needed is that we have a long-term multi-agency support network. So there are already structures in the countries that we're speaking about, but there needs to be funding and awareness that this kind of long-term support needs to be sustained.
What I'm going to focus on is a theory of change that we developed, and that focuses on applying a trauma and countering violent extremism informed approach to reintegration and rehabilitation in the United States. So just to give a little bit of context, up to date, there's been approximately 900 people prosecuted for terrorism-related offenses in the United States. And by the next year, almost a quarter of them will complete their terms of incarceration, in addition to the almost 30% of them that have already returned home. This is not considering, the rise in far-right extremism related convictions. For example, from 2019 to 2020, there was an uptick in 90 in the number of terrorism prosecutions filed by the United States Attorney's Office. And up to date, there's approximately 905 defendants regarding January 6th. So the issue with this population, of course, is we identified two. First of all, that there are currently no programs aimed at addressing the specific needs of this population, not just the fact that they were at some point in their life involved in extremist activities, but of course the experiences resulting from incarceration and again post-release. And those programs that do exist focus on the ideology rather than how the broader context and circumstances affects identity formation, decision-making, and of course have played a role in radicalization and can play a role going forward when speaking about rehabilitation and reintegration. So based on this notion, this awareness, we changed the lens a little bit through which we approached rehabilitation and reintegration. And we reframed, so to say, the way we understood radicalization, and we changed the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So, it is a theory, and I do want to speak right now about how all of this looks like in practice. And for that, we delineated 6 objectives that contribute to the broader goal of when speaking about reintegration and rehabilitation, which would be to facilitate the safe, healthy, and dignified rehabilitation and reintegration of extremist offenders, while decreasing the likelihood of in-prison radicalization and increasing social resilience to violent extremism over the long term. And to wrap up, I'll explain quickly how this works. Well, the individual in prison, once they're released, they would be connected to a network of probation officers, mental health practitioners, religious leaders, PCV practitioners, and community organizers, as I was saying, professionals of different backgrounds that will interact with the individual at different levels, and therefore can garner information about how the process of reintegration and rehabilitation is going. And can, of course, if that network has created, remember the first premise of all of this, then all of them can coordinate information sharing and see where any shortcomings are, any challenges that we're facing that can be identified by some experts and not others, simply because of the nature of the relationship they may have with the individual rehabilitating. This, of course, can inform academia in this case to identify what works, for whom, what circumstances, how, for how long. Because of course, this process will vary depending on the individual and will evolve over time. But essentially, this will give us a scaffold that would allow us to set up, I'm not saying best practices, but for now promising and hopefully good practices when it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration that can ultimately inform policymaking. And that being said, thank you very much, everybody, for being here today and for the excellent conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Dr. Fernandez-Garayzabal. We really appreciate your insight and your leadership on getting this event going today. You mentioned something at the end of your presentation right there about, on the last slide, you mentioned PCVE practitioners. I would argue that a lot of folks don't know their own roles in preventing acts of targeted violence or acts of violent extremism. social service agencies, which stand up not necessarily to stop violence, are really trying to amplify protective factors and provide the social services that individuals need so they're positive pro-social members of society. So as we look to expand this network with 4R and also look to inform others about this network, I think that the nomenclature for those types of practitioners will take on even a broader scope as well. So very, very, very insightful. Thank you.